Everybody, and we will have a round table around semiotics and translation. And may I introduce first our colleagues here from Kaunas University. We have Dr. Dainora Maumevičienė from Translation Studies, and you have many areas, as you can read in the abstract. And then Dr. Saulė Petronienė, and you are an associate professor. And then my colleague from University of Helsinki, Ritva Hartama-Heinonen, she's a doctor and a senior lecturer in Swedish translation studies. And I'm Pirjo Kukkonen, and I'm professor of Swedish translation studies at the University of Helsinki, at the Department of Finnish, Finno-Ugrian and Scandinavian Studies. So we waited for you.
I see that we're waiting. Thank you. So I have the pleasure to moderate the session. And okay, thank you, Pirjo, for already introducing our guests. I just would like to add a couple of notes. One thing is that this is an experiment for us. It's the first time that in the Congress, instead of having a traditional plenary lecture, we are having a plenary roundtable. We're having one today and another one tomorrow, which are related to the main events within the events that we have within ICON. So these are symposia, not just sessions. So SEMTRA, it's a symposium that has been going on for many years, and this year is the 12th edition. So it started already when ISI was in Finland, in Imatra. And we're hosting also the 4th edition of the symposium on cultural heritages this year, so tomorrow we will have a plenary roundtable about that. So the reason why we wanted a roundtable instead of a lecture was that we were hoping for an interdisciplinary dialogue between various approaches on the study of translation. So for instance, in this particular case, if I'm allowed to generalize a little bit, we have the Finnish school, which is more oriented towards a semiotic use of translation studies, and the Lithuanian school, which is probably more linguistic oriented. So the idea is that we start as a multidisciplinary platform, so in this case 2 disciplines coexisting, and we want to see how much we go into the interdisciplinary direction. And the other thing is that I hope that among the topics that will emerge today, there is also an idea of the state of the art of translation studies. Where are they now? Where they may go in the future? What are the main challenges and issues of this sort? So I hope this experiment will work, because if it will, we may repeat it also in the next editions of ICON. So thank you very much to our guests, and I hope we will have an interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dario. Maybe I use this. Yes. So our SEMTRA 2016 has this theme: processes, maps, and narratives in semiotics and translation. And we can ask here today, here at the round table, why semiotics and translation, and what is the state of the art of semiotics and translation, and also translation studies. And began this symposia in Imatra, Finland. We were very happy to continue here in Kaunas, our 10th SEMTRA in 2014. And then last year we had SEMTRA 2015, and now the 12th. So we are very happy to be here and discuss these themes of translation. And we can say that the turn or the semiotic turn of translation began actually with Roman Jakobson already 1959, scientifically. I say only some words about our abstract that we have on a net for this symposia. So first about the history of semiotics, and why we combine semiotics and translation, because both these disciplines elaborate with science and translate science and communicate with science and the crucial aim is meaning, signification, semiosis, how we create meaning. So we have interpreted science, natural science and human-made science, to give them an identity, a content, a purpose, and a meaning for a very, very long time in our history. And this nice theme that we have here, processes, maps and narratives, it suits very well for our theme at our symposia. Science becomes meaningful only in processes and systems. So in the history of semiotics, the process of semiosis was mapped very early if we look at the history of semiotics. And we know all these different terms for semiotics, semiotica, semiotica, semiotic, or semiotic, were employed as official medical terms. So that is very interesting, what kind of symptoms a disease showed, for instance. And within philosophy, semiotics was introduced in the thought of Locke, very early 1690, Lambert, Bolzano, and so on, as well as of Peirce, Morris, and many others in the 19th and 20th century. And then we come, of course, to Saussure, his linguistic theory and his concepts. Then we come to Roman Jakobson, that is very, very central in semiotics and translation, as I said earlier. And Greimas, of course, when we talk about narratives. So next year we will ponder more around Greimas and narratives, his accentual, modal, semiotic modalities and narratives. And then in the 17th, we got Lottmann and Bachtin, the cultural semiotics. I myself is applying cultural semiotics very much. And 1969 we got semiotics, was adopted as the general term. So this very short historical overview of the four main branches of semiotics, empirical, philosophical, linguistic, and cultural, illustrates the idea of a sign process, that is how signs, when they are used for some function or purpose, become meaningful. And that is very crucial and central in translation and translation studies also. And then, of course, Halliday is very, very central. His social semiotics from the 1970s and in audiovisual translation and interpreting and so on. Multimodality is the term that is used very much in translation studies today, and also multi-semiotics. And if we think about translation studies or the historical mapping of translation studies, semiotics is used in many ways as theories, methodologies, and perspectives, dialogically and polyphonically, as collaborative strategies, but also, as Bachtin has written, it's a scene for heteroglossia. Mona Baker has written about these narratives in conflict, so that is a very, very important issue. And then, of course, Eco's struttura assente, the form not being there. So both semioticians and translation scholars have to deal with this implicit structure, actually. So translation studies is relatively young interdiscipline, so that is very, very good to remember from the 1950s. And it's borrowing methods from other disciplines, as does the interdisciplinary field of the semiotics of translation. So for both semiotics and translation studies, the processes of signification and meaning making is crucial, as I told before. So what have we done so far at our symposia? We have discussed inter, and multidisciplinarity within semiotics, multisemiotics, and multimodal studies, translation semiotics and translation studies. And when we're drawing on the theoretical and empirical approaches to the questions of semiotics and translation, the aim has been to chart the maps, gaps, and bridges in narrating traditional and new theories, methodologies, and models in translation activity. And translation activity covers Jacobson's from 1959 intralingual, interlingual, and intersemiotic forms of interpretation and translation, and concerns diverse text worlds which provide us with an opportunity to interpret, translate, transfer, and mediate, for instance, textually, genre, specifically and stylistically varying signs across science systems. So when we think about these narratives in translation, maps and gaps and bridges, we can recall what Pierre-François Callier said when he was president of the International Federation of Translators, established in 1953. This is a wonderful sentence: turning translations into instrument of humanism, peace, and progress. Such is our noble task. So translation has also this very idea of humanism, humanity, peace, and progress. And I mentioned Mona Baker. She has written about narratives in and of translation, the notion of narrativity, how narratives operate and how they impact our lives, the narratives that dominate the discourse on translation. So the narrative of translation as a means of promoting peace, tolerance, and understanding through enabling communication and dialogue. Enabling communication is very central. And Brunner writes like this: the central concern is not how narrative as text is constructed, but rather how it operates as an instrument of mind in the construction of reality. So for us, we see translation and semiotics as cultural heritage. Translation transfers cultural heritage, tradition, and innovation. So we have this big aim in translation studies and also semiotics. And if we recall Octavio Paz, what he says, the history of the different civilizations is the history of their translations. Each civilization, as each soul, is different, unique. Translation is our way to face this otherness of the universe and history. So what have translators done when I have made my research on the translating subject, the I, the translating I? We can recall that translators have developed national languages, national literatures, importing knowledge through translation, spread of ideas, religions, transmission of cultural values, production of dictionaries, interpreters making history, and so and so. So there are only some aspect of this, what a translator, what the role of translator is. So as I said that I'm very interested about the translating subject. Émilie de Châtelet is one example of this, how much she wrote and how much she translated. So we have interpreted science as long as we have history. This kind of Rosetta Stone, for instance, there were already the functions, the text functions. Text function is a very crucial concept in translation studies. So there, on the stone there are three scopos actually, so three kind of languages for the common people, for the religious purpose, and so on. And we have interpreted signs like runes and text like palimpsests and so on. So we have interpreted signs all the time. And I will end with this because we will talk a little bit about the education of translators and the art of translation studies at our universities. So in Finland, where we have two national languages, Finnish and Swedish, the education of translators and interpreters is a very big issue. So we have this how we educate students theoretically for the practical profession. And translation is culture, as I said. Translation transfers cultural heritage, and bildung, sivistus is the Finnish word for that, bildning in Swedish. So it's much about understanding, but also misunderstanding, as we talked today, how you can misinterpret texts in European EU today. So I will end with this short presentation, and Ritva, would you like to say some words?
No, it doesn't work. There is. It doesn't. No, it doesn't work. It has done this all the time.
Okay, that's fine. So where is yours?
It's the other one.
This is yours?
That's mine. I hope that it will work.
And then we will start.
I'll leave it then there. Yes, so it's. Thank you. We have mentioned already several times that this is the 12th Symposium on Semiotics and Translation. However, the series of symposia covers 17 years. I have participated 11 times, so I guess I have been able to follow for quite a long time both the development of the semiotic approaches to translation and the efforts to establish this field in order to find recognition. The very first two symposia were titled Semiotics of Translation, but nowadays the series is called Semiotics and Translation, and the reason is that in the year 2000, Pirjo Kukkonen started a project called Semiotics and Translation. We are a very small group of researchers. We started to gather at Imatra, and nowadays there's even we are quite a few nowadays here at Kaunas, but we have been, as Pirjo said, lucky to be able to continue here after the Imatra years. We have discussed all kinds of things that has to do with semiotics, even though the titles might not, or the themes might not reveal that. This is a figure of how translation studies has developed. And as you notice, there are certain objects, paradigms or major terms, and then different kind of approaches and theories. This is not a translation theoretical description of how things are, because there are two mentions of or two words that do two words or group of words that does not belong to the traditional or the accepted description of translation studies, and that is among the paradigms there is a semiotic paradigm, and among the approaches a third is semiotic perspectives. I'm a translation scholar. That's my main job, so to speak, but I'm also a translation theoretician. And this is my description of how things are. I have wanted to include semiotics there, but in the ordinary descriptions, semiotics is not mentioned. But I think I have the right to do that in this context. I have written an article, and it was published this year. And this is some sort of self-assessment, self-accusations of things, why it has been so that we have not been able to put ourselves on the map, I mean translation semioticians. And there are 5 claims or interpretations or theses of this of what the semiotics of translation is like and why it is quite difficult. I mean this history of semiotics of translation. And this is not to be interpreted that I say that semiotics is too all-inclusive and too fuzzy. It means that it might be so that for those who are outsiders, they think that semiotics is all-inclusive. And because it is all-inclusive, it contains anything that is specific, and that makes it fuzzy. The second is that the translation semiotic conception of translation is too comprehensive. And this comes from the idea that the field of semiotics is so wide because it includes all kinds of science. So that perhaps is too much for many of translation scholars to accept this idea that we can examine all kinds of science, not only verbal, not only visual, but all kinds of science. That is the realm we have. And the third is that because this, the scope of the semiotics of translation is too wide, so our field is also vague. That is how we can interpret it. And it is a very ambitious project. And if we then want to make another definition, say that it must be narrower, it can also be counterproductive. Semiotics cannot, however, be whatever we want it to be. Used also by non-semioticians, the words semiotics or semiotic, they are merely words. They don't necessarily reveal anything about the user's further commitments to science theoretical views. But all that is presented or referred to as semiotics does not have to be semiotics or accepted as such. But that is perhaps a reason that semiotics might also separate us. The fourth claim here is that we are too dependent on Roman Jakobson. This is an idea that I have started, and it's something I have experienced lately, because I mean, if we read about semiotics of translation, Jakobson is always mentioned. He was very innovative, very visionary, and he emphasized the nature of translation as sign translation and sign interpretation. But on the other hand, he focused on language rather than on science in general. Still, I have to admit that Jakobson is one of the cornerstones in semiotics of translation today. And the fifth is that whenever we say that we are translation semioticians, most of researchers think that we are interested in pictures, images, multimodality. And that's not the truth. But there are many translation semioticians who think that intersemiotic translation is translation proper. In a sense, this kind of tendency is perhaps also counterproductive for the course of translation semiotics. So in this article I have referred here to, I have come to the conclusion that we need a more unified discourse. And I think that much of the problems the semiotics translation has faced belongs or refers to that we have not been able to pronounce our aims and ideas in a way that we could be received well by translation studies, also vice versa.
So, good afternoon, everyone, and I shall sit myself because this is a roundtable discussion, and just we have a roundtable, so let's try discussing and just talking about, I would say, clashing point of translation and semiotics, because not clashing, sorry to express myself, but coming point where we come up together. I mean, both disciplines share the same grounds. And we have lots of things to talk about. First of all, when we start talking about translation and semiotics in general, the first idea that pops into our heads is what? Meaning. How do we generate it? How do we generate using signs, symbols? And naturally, thanks to Pirjo and Ritva, we had like a discourse, historical discourse going back to translation studies as such. How do they develop? Of course, naturally, they dwell on development of meaning and transfer of meaning from one culture to another. And how do we decipher those signs that we see? And if we come back to idea that a word is a sign and a symbol of some language, some culture, we have common grounds, and I guess here we may have a complementary effect. Both disciplines or like branches of studies, they complement each other, and there's where we have to celebrate, where we should be happy, because this helps us achieving holistic effect. Because, well, with us naturally, with linguists, semioticians, let it be translators, I do not want to subdivide us into different branches, but all of us have a very strange tendency to make some branch individual, which falls only to one or other branch or area. But it's not like that. Actually, what is happening around? We usually have no white or dark, black. Usually, it's gray. Of course, naturally, we have the core focal, as in cognitive linguistics we say, focal issues, when we can clearly categorize. But naturally, we have those fuzzy boundaries. And this is where we can have that positive effect, seeing versatile picture. Again, if we start talking about translation, so naturally we remember it's a very young discipline, as though activity itself is very old. I mean, we can talk about translations that were made many, many years ago. And again, if we assume the idea of movement of text, which is well quoted in Anthony Stem writings, texts are moving within ages, within generations, within different groups. And when we come back to texts that were written in caves, I mean, actually, these are not texts. These are texts, well, in a sense, full of signs. And we try interpreting what are in those caves. And what is going on right now in translation studies and the field and the process and the act of translating, we're coming back to the caves again. Why do I say that? Because technologies, they make our language look like very much symbolic, full of signs. Let's take new medias. Let's take Facebook. Let's take our communication channels. Let's take even such sacred things like theater, where we have surtitling, a type of translation when we use icons. Again, so what is that? I mean, it's simply, again, the very same symbols, signs, where we try to decipher, decode meaning, and how do we render that meaning from one language to another, from one culture to another culture. So I guess then, well, thanks to this Congress, we have to celebrate. We have to celebrate interdisciplinarity pretty much, because we can see what we haven't seen before. And I mean, we can see a wider picture, wider kaleidoscope. And again, if we come back talking about translation and such, well, what is happening right now? We are raising seminal questions to translator and translator status. Because when it comes to interpreting of signs, again, is it only me as a translator who has the right to interpret? Don't I need the help of other disciplines to be able to interpret or to render that sign? Well, for sign, I mean the word in a corrective way. And when we talk what is happening right now in translation studies in general, so we have to say that we are in a mess at the moment because of different approaches, different schools, and different ideologies even, and even the curtain had a negative effect. I'm talking about Russian school. Because of that, we simply are not acknowledging fruitful texts that can be incorporated. And again, right now, we just simply notice, though the act itself of translation and activities related to human being and, well, in correlation to translation are very old, we do not have research done about translation as science. I mean, and when technologies come, they do not help us at all. Even what they do, they start again raising the issues. Well, who are translators? And here we have another crisis of the value of the profession of translation as such. So I mean, simply having, well, knowledge of, let's say, semiotics as such, having all the tools together, it helps us, again, coming back and proving that, look, translators are not someone, well, and translation is not something that can be done by anyone. Because technologies, what they do, we're pretty much happy about that, but what do? They damage the status of translation. They also damage within the process of communication, because again, I'm coming to the very same idea that we are coming back to caves. If we take any Facebook message, it looks like pretty much encrypted. So how do we deal with that? What would be your views about that? And yesterday in our session, we had a very nice discussion about coming up of different professions together and solving issues in translation. Who is the better translator? The one who has a degree in translation studies, who is so-called sworn translator and belongs to an association of translators, or the one who probably likes languages, he's good at languages, he has mastered several languages pretty well, but he's a professional doctor. And this is what is at stake at the moment when we talk about translation and translation studies. So how do we deal with that? Do we bring them together? Let's see, when we take IT texts, so how do we deal with that? And well, when technologies, when they're here, we're pretty much happy to use them. But what does that mean? This means that everyone is a translator. I mean, I can take Google, I can take Omega T, am I a translator? So this is what right now we have to solve. And this is what is more important when we talk about training of translators, interpreters, localizers. I mean, then raising status of translation as profession and such, and motivating them, showing that yes, your profession is valued, you are valued. So this is what is at stake. So maybe right now we could even just discuss a bit. How is that in your countries? How is that in your schools? Do you feel the same? Do you face the same problems? Yes, because right now we want to increase the value of translation as such. And this is what, again, I'm coming to the very same idea that this is where semiotics and translation, they should come together and help each other, and they could help translators to be recognized as well. So how is that in Finland? Ritva and Pirjo, could you share? Status of translation. Does it help even you? Well, just for example,
The state of translation in Finland is, as everywhere in Europe, the state is very difficult because there's competition all the time, and there are very small agencies that don't manage to get a job. So there are translators who do not continue in their professions. On the other hand, there are certain international companies who do very well, and I think this everywhere also, because they are the winners of the competition. We hope that this is something that we are just experiencing now, and things will be better in the future. We need translators, and the reason in Finland for this is that we are a very small country. And I can tell you that we are now planning a new degree programs at the University of Helsinki. So far we have had translator training also on the bachelor level, and now in a couple of years it's only on the master's level. It might be more efficient, we do not know. But what is happening is that when I started my own studies in the 70s and 80s, there were very few languages that were represented. Now, when we are planning this new master's program, we have 5 languages that have been on the program for all the years, 5 languages that are now, or if you have studied a language, you can continue on the master's level. And then there will be new languages. So this master's program can have 15 different languages. And I have to mention that one of these languages is Lithuanian. Do you have translating between Finnish and Lithuanian in your country? I just ask.
Thank you. Well, at the moment at our university, we do not have this direction. Well, but in the future, naturally, we have to think about that, because right now, Scandinavian languages are pretty much on the demand, and they are pretty much favored by students and naturally companies, because lots of businesses come into it. But again, I'm coming back to the same paradox. Right now, well, we are proud of saying that translation is a part of language industry, which is increasing, growing very quickly, which is extremely large, generating profits. It didn't experience any recession because people still, we are users, we still use, and we need lots of guidelines, instructions, how to use certain gadgets and so on and so forth. Then we are the ones who watch films, go into movies. We need dubbing, subtitling. We use lots of software and apps. So again, I'm coming to the question, am I proud being a member of that large sector? This is what is at stake at the moment because of technologies, yeah, at the very same time. But how's that with training of translators? Saulė, maybe you could share a bit. Do they feel proud that they are going to be future translators, our students? How's that about that?
Hello everyone, thank you Dainora, and thank you Pirjo and Ritva for your insights and translation. And Dainora raised an interesting issue about training translators and about being proud to be translators. I have looked into the program of our Congress, and I have counted 6 countries which are represented in the field of translation. It is Finland and Lithuania, which are gathering the majority of researchers in translation. Also, I have noticed that there are universities in Switzerland, Germany, and France represented. And I have been thinking that it would be really interesting to share the experience, what is going on in all those countries in the field of translation trainers. Because when we talk about Lithuania, I don't know if we are proud to be translators. This is the question for students who study translation. But from my personal experience, from what we have been experiencing and what I have noticed is that in Lithuania, the profession of translation is not acknowledged as such, and it is not valued as it should be, because Lithuanian being a small, like representing by a small number of native speakers. We are a small country, and we can survive by only learning bigger languages. And English is quite popular in Lithuanian, and I cannot say with 100% that everyone speaks English, but talking about translation, everyone is a translator. If he or she speaks English, he or she consider themselves to be translators, and there comes the paradox that the work of a professional translator is undervalued, because what we hear is, well, I need a translation, I could translate myself, I just don't have time. So then when we talk about the price of translation, it's a challenge to prove yourself, to prove that you have to be valued, that you are a professional translator, and this is what we are faced with. Now, another challenge which I have noticed in the field of translator training is that our students are not very much involved in research. We have a tradition to organize students' conferences, which is annual, and every year they are encouraged to participate with their presentations, with their research, and with their paper publication. Because when we talk about master studies, students who publish, they receive points, and for them it is easier to enter the university in master level. However, this year, the percentage of students in students' conference was very low. And we've made very small research about that. And if we talk about students of social sciences and humanities, there is only 7% of them representing the field of humanities, so which is a very small number. And only 4% of those 7% participated in the conference this year. So we have to work in this direction as well, because this is how we not only educate and prepare translators, but also how we have new generation of researchers and professional translators. And when talking to my colleagues from Finland yesterday and today, you have heard that in Finland, in the University of Helsinki, they have only a program in master's level, which is also an interesting fact. Why only in master's level? Does that mean that, first of all, you have to master a profession, as Dainora said? For example, to be the specialist in, I don't know, civil engineering or electronics or other field, and then go on studying to be a professional translator. So I don't know if there are representatives from those universities I have counted in the program. So maybe what I would like to do is now to initiate the discussion, not just us delivering any topics, but also maybe you giving your opinion and your insights on the situation in your university.
Thank you. Thank you, the four of you, for very, very interesting insights. I already myself have quite a few questions, but I really would like to leave the floor for the audience. So is there anybody who would like to intervene on any of the subjects launched by our speakers? Yes.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, you've raised so many questions. So the best thing is to start with the last one and forget about, at the moment at any rate, about the real fundamental ones. But the direct question was, how is the rest of Europe dealing with training and training in the universities and the professional perspective in the markets? Well, if I may speak about Germany, which is of course a risk, because semiotically speaking, I'm not Germany. I'm only one result of the German educational system. But I've been involved in the training of translators, marginally interpreters. I'm in a way glad that the pattern that was initiated in the course of the Bologna process and then via the support of the European Commission to create a pattern of translation training in universities has now obviously been adopted in Finland as well. In my university, we were the first ones who introduced the Bologna model, that is bachelor-master degrees. And when I started in my job, so to say, we still had a program that finished with a diploma, a 4-year course. But our public, our student reservoir, were students interested in languages, who then discovered that translating, especially now, sitting in front of a monitor, was not everybody's favorite activity, especially as people like us like to communicate. And communication in front of a monitor is a rather one-sided affair. So introducing a bachelor, a degree that was not a translation degree, was the only chance of separating those who would be interested seriously in becoming translators and interpreters, and filtering out the ones who are, let's say, only interested in language. But with a bachelor, according to the Anglo-Saxon model, you can embark on any kind of further training in industry and in the economy on the whole. So now, I think I could say all of the universities and what in Germany is called Hochschulen, who are training interpreters and translators, do it on the level of master programs. And this means a higher degree of professionalization. Means that the graduates are able to apply for those jobs in Brussels and in the ministries of the EU countries. And I think this meant and means better qualification for those who embark on master programs with better job possibilities afterwards. And even this question of pay and remuneration is better because you have, first of all, fewer people with a degree that is called translator or interpreter. And you are on the market, at least you have a degree which separates you. And the time where, let's say, amateurs or conoscenti enter the market, I wouldn't say is over, but the chances for the professionals are much better today. And I think that these master students who did a degree, let's say, in specialized translation or in interpreting, have a better grounding also in the theories that are behind the translation process, including the larger semiotic questions, do have an advantage over the good laymen. I mean, they will always be around, but whether they are the ideal professionals, I have my doubts, frankly. Okay, thank you.
Just throw the microphone up and whoever catches it first. Or maybe somebody from the audience would like to react to this.
Thank you very much for sharing the ideas, and that looks very much interesting and just we could expect that actually this turn, because how to say from this perspective, translation, let's say as such, is seen as something substitutional. I mean, something added to something. What you mentioned, better professionals, like in EU commissions or all EU large bureaucratic part, I mean. But again, if we come back, let's say, just the very, state of the art of profession itself, so then again, we come back to that question unsolved. I mean, naturally, just, when I have some background, I mean, adding up some linguistic knowledge and, let's say, being a doctor and having professional degree in translation, that helps me a lot. But really, then we come to another question, ethics. Ethics of translator as a profession, regulation of it. I mean, then we can pose the same question. Can a semiotician be anyone? Are we all semioticians? At some perspective, yes, we are, because, for example, road signs, we can interpret them pretty well, and we are able to master with that. Again, so then, those boundaries are very fuzzy, or like then just becoming a doctor. Okay, we know that probably, or even in construction, civil engineering, probably I wouldn't like having a house that was built by someone who initially studied, maybe bakery, and then got into masters. Of course, right now I'm a bit sarcastic and joking in a way. And, I guess this is here where we, theoreticians and practitioners have to come in and make a strong say, because right now, mainly, we're basically observing what is happening when, let's say, different documentation, legal acts are being are coming into force. We usually we take the part of observance, and just we observe what's happening, and only then as if we wake up. I know that at the moment, European schools, large schools of translators, they're reviewing, new standards for, the profession of a translator, and they're debating a lot, should we adopt that, or, somehow, just reject that? Because what you have just mentioned might be adopted. I mean, this model. So.
Thank you. If I may add a little piece here, you raised exactly the problem that Ritva was raising in her presentation, which I appreciated a lot, because as myself, somebody dealing with semiotics, I face the same problem. Yes, in principle, semiotics is more or less everywhere, in the sense that as an animal species, we are driven to communicate, because as animals we have to be social. So the moment you become social, you have a communication problem to solve. And the moment you have a communication problem to solve, you have a semiotic problem to solve. This is for sure. But I also agree very much with Ritva. I thought your self-critical assessment was really great, because I could identify the same problems that any other field of semiotics is experiencing. You know, maybe changing one name or two, but it's the same. So I think the problem in semiotics arises the very moment the semioticians start to believe that. The moment when the semioticians start to believe that, yes, semiotics is about everything, then there is a kind of delirium that you know, can bring can lead the field astray. As humanists, we are dealing with everything. Every field of humanities, you know, philosophy was born as love for life. So it is, we are all philosophers in a sense, and we are all translators in a sense. So I think this is a very important point. One question that I myself have, as somebody who is not into translation, but obviously deals with translation because my publication output is in a language that is not my native language, at least for 80% of what I publish. There is a paradox, which is a lose-lose situation rather than a win-win situation, that to have your stuff translated is very expensive, and for a translator it is a very cheap job. A translator gets very little in translating a job, and somebody who wants his work translated has to pay a lot, because the translator spends a lot of time, obviously, in trying to get the translation right, but all this time calculated in money becomes very expensive for the client. So I wonder whether there will be at any point a solution to that. I was hoping in the digitalization of translation, but so far Google Translate is a disaster. Umberto Eco made this very nice thing of translating back and forth a lot of things until they became something completely bizarre. So I think maybe this is part of the problem, that there's no way to find something that is convenient for both sides. So, thank you.
So again, as Daria, you just confirmed that translation is too expensive. And for us, it doesn't look like that.
Exactly, that's the lose-lose situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So can you imagine what situation we are in when we try to explain that to people who are not from the field of philology or humanities, who are from the field of technology?
If I may add just quickly, we should raise awareness about profession as such, because, well, to the ones who are non-translators, well, non-linguists, having anything to do with humanities, for them, learning and speaking or just writing in English is something very natural, like you make a cup of tea. And, well, they usually simply say, okay, well, but it takes 5 minutes. Just, well, when you watch the news, could you post-edit the text? Nobody understands that it's hard work, mental work. And, I mean, somehow we forget that. I mean, because you come up with decisions and you're trying to find out solutions, how to interpret and how to understand one culture and another culture and language at the very same time. So this is one issue. Another issue, I'm coming back to technologies, because this is a problem what technologies do. I mean, well, they raise the question of authenticity or authorship. Because, okay, well, with, let's say, Trados, well, one technology kit, you may use translations that were done by your colleagues. So how do you prove that it was you who did that? I mean, well, and of course, sometimes clients, they know that, and they say, okay, but it just was, well, just an act of pushing one button. But nobody thinks that you have to know what button and what is there. And I mean, sometimes we may have even large consequences on human lives. I mean, sometimes it seems just insignificant when you write 3.5 mixing up comma and a full stop. It has a completely different meaning, and you mix up millions with decimals. So imagine, well, the head of a company wouldn't be happy, let's say that he signed, well, for 3.5 euros instead of 3.5 million euros, some kind of contract. And this was simply a case of, well, wrong, well, format, which you have to know. So this is the issue, and this is why we are very much happy about technologies. We have become technologically savvy, but the problem is that they also harm us. Because, well, because of that, everything becomes easily accessible. But the biggest problem is we do not know how to use it, and we do not know how to deal with information. And this is the greatest challenge we're facing now, because, well, even young future translators to be, sometimes they do not know how to search for the right meaning, the right word, despite the fact that lots of sources are around, information is abundant. And I guess the biggest problem right now is that we are, well, simply, well, diving too deep in that information ocean, and actually we start sinking instead of thinking.
Dario, if you want to get a translation, you will certainly get it. Find a translator, and cheap, and someone who does it in a very low price, but then what you receive is not of quality. So it's always a question of quality if you hire a professional translator. And now we have discussed the role of technology. It might mean Google Translate. After some years, perhaps it would be possible to use Google Translate and get a translation of quality, also between Lithuanian and Italian. But at the moment, that is something that is very good for small languages, because Google Translate cannot translate so that you can understand. But if it's between German and English, the situation is totally different. And there are also another, it's not a problem. It's something that is very human, and we have to appreciate it, is that there are lots of people who do voluntarily translating and interpreting. But on the other hand, there might be some professional translator who loses his or her job at the same time. So there are very many things that are happening at the same time, so many variables we can't control. And that's the problem of the profession. And perhaps also that we are so rich that we can give our young people a possibility to go to school and learn languages so they can translate.
Yeah. I will go back to this when you mentioned that students are not interested in theoretical issues. What can we do? Because students need theory and methods and abstract thinking, because translation is so complicated. And as you said, translation is a hard work. My students ask me the first question when the new students come, how much do they pay? So there is no value, it's not valuated. Humanists are not valuated today, so we don't have very high salaries in translation as professionals. So that is a very difficult question. But what can we do with this theoretical part? How can we improve? How can we make students interested in theories and methods? Semiotics and translation studies. That's a big issue.
Some other comment from the audience? Nothing on the note of not sufficiently evaluated humanists, we all fell silent. Okay. Yeah. Shh. shorter, perhaps.
Well, I think if you start training translators too early, then this is indeed the first question, because I think the first impulse is, do I study business, do I go into business studies or translation? But I think the motivation for translating is something that has to be discovered and develops. And at the age of 19, only exceptional students will say, I'm going to become a translator. But if they have studied anything, I mean, it could be medicine, but suddenly they decide, oh no, surgery is not my thing. I will go into the translation business and will translate medical books. There are examples like this. Then somebody has found his vocation, and I think that is a necessary step, that on the basis of certain experiences, then you can decide, that's what I want to do. And the question of how much you make then does not disappear, but it becomes a little bit more secondary.
So, some concluding remark. I think we can steal another 2 or 3 minutes to the coffee break.
Would you like to have the last word, Dainora?
Thank you very much. Well, so I very much agree with the last phrase that has been said, but I believe that in the area of humanities and humanities, we are all about vocation. And simply we do that because we like it and because we love it and feel passion for that. And well, as you mentioned, all the other things become of secondary importance, but still they shouldn't be that secondary. Still we have to survive. But well, what I would like us to do again, to start talking more about that with social partners, businessmen, companies, future potential employers, even about talking about research, raising awareness of both, semiotics and translation, humanities as such, because I believe that is why we have arrived at that recession crisis where we are right now with our societies, civilizations, because we have forgotten humanities as such, and we, as the ones who represent the field of humanities, are a bit too silent and are a bit too sleepy. So I would say, let's wake up.
Thank you. And just a concluding remark before we give an applause to our plenary roundtable speakers. I just would like to say that, so as I said, this was a first attempt to see if this format can work. I think we all got a little bit frustrated from the fact that there is not enough time to even begin to start to commence talking about certain problems. But I think that it may be a good idea for providing food for thought to everybody, and also to insist a little bit on creating a platform that may aim to interdisciplinarity, because probably one thing that we need to understand is that interdisciplinarity is an achievement, not a point of departure, and it takes hard work. It's not an easy thing to do. So there are problems, there will be problems when different disciplines, different approaches within the same discipline are confronting each other. But I think the moment we keep the mind open, we realize that we all need added values to whatever we do, and sometimes the added value come from outside. Then this is the moment when we get closer to real interdisciplinarity. So I would like to thank you very much, because I think you offered a lot of insight by your presentations. So thank you very much, and the coffee break is ready. Thank you.